All right, good morning, eighth grade. Sorry the video was late. Um, like I said, we had a staff meeting at 9 for junior high teachers, and so I didn't get a chance to get it uploaded prior to that, but I'm doing it now. So hopefully for most of you this is fine. Like I said in the message I posted in the stream. So I'm doing these video checks so that I know that you're actually watching my lectures. Not because I feel like my lectures are the best thing in the world, but I feel like it's going to help you learn the material that you have to learn. And if you don't watch them, I think you can learn some from the book, but it's not going to be as clear to you, and you're not going to do as well on the assessments. So this is just a homework grade. The video checks really are just like make sure you're watching the video. They should be full credit every time. All right. So maybe take a look at those questions prior to watching the video so you know what to focus on or what to listen for in the video portion. I'm just going to quickly go through what we're doing today. So you need to do the section 8.3 open note quiz, which I believe, I'm going to go to your classroom. Yes, I posted it. So do it. Use all the materials. Um, use my lecture, use my book images. Remember, I'm not doing separate notes for this chapter, but use the book images and maybe listen to my lecture again and then go through and do it. You can go through the practice problems. I will be posting, when were those practice problems due? They were due, the complex patterns of inheritance were due yesterday. And I think I graded them too. So I'll be posting later on today. I did do answer keys for this, so I'll be posting those below. So if you want to wait till I post those and make sure your answers are correct, you can do that as well. As soon as I'm done with this, I'll post those answer keys. All right, so let's get on to 8.4. Well, actually, let me finish up what you have to do today. So that was the open note quiz. You're obviously watching this lecture and doing the video check on Google Forms, which, like I said, if you watch the lecture, the video check should take you about 2 minutes to complete. And then just work on the study guide. I did post the study guide last night. It's basically just terms and practice problems, which is what your test is going to look like. I may add a couple extra questions about this last section that we're talking about, but I'll post that in a separate doc if I choose to, and I'll attach it to the study guide that I've already posted. I haven't decided that yet. We're going to have our test on Tuesday of next week. On Monday, we'll do some sort of review. I'll post some sort of review game as well as the answer key to the study guide. So get your study guide in on Sunday night, right? You can either print them or you can do them on loose leaf. Either way, I need to physically see the images of your completed study guide as well as a screenshot of your Quizlet so I can give you points. I think this study guide is either worth 20 or 25 homework points, which is a good amount. So just do it. Do it, upload it, turn it in, and you'll get a 25 out of 25, and you'll be ready for the test. Okay, we're wrapping this up next week, and you guys will have spring break. So this is the last stretch prior to break. All right, let's move on with our lecture for the day. It's going to be quick. I'm going to go through this. It is 8 pages, so it's a bit of a longer section, but there's a few main things I want you to understand, and I'm going to focus on those. All right, so first thing. So while Gregory Mendel made great contributions in terms of understanding the fact that there were these genes that controlled traits and that you get half of your genes from your mom and half of your genes from your dad, and he called them factors, right? We went over this, I think it was in 8.1 maybe. So he was the first one to recognize that there was such a thing as a gene. The next person that's important is an individual named Walter Sutton. And what Walter Sutton did was he figured out, or he found out through his experimentation with, I believe it was grasshoppers, was that it? Yeah, grasshoppers, that chromosomes are really what is the key to understanding genes and how genes control traits. So if we flip to the next page, it goes through and it details kind of what he did and what he discovered. And I kind of summarized it up at the top. So let me zoom into my notes at the top. But the three main, just go upstairs. The three main things that he found out was that number one, sex cells have half the chromosomes of regular cells. Before him, we didn't know that. We didn't know that the organism sex cells, the egg or the sperm, only had half the amount of chromosomal material. So he figured that out. He also found out that once an egg becomes fertilized, now that new combined cell or group of cells now has all the chromosomes that the organism should have. So the organism was getting half of the chromosomes from the egg cell and half from the sperm cell. And combined, it created a new organism with a full set of chromosomes. And then he basically summarized his findings in the chromosome theory of inheritance. And the chromosome theory of inheritance is down here in bold. And it basically just says that genes pass from parents to their offspring on chromosomes. So this notion that we're passing these traits on genes was started by Mendel, and then Sutton came along, and through his experimentation with grasshoppers, he figured out, or he helped us to understand how that happens, and that chromosomes really are the key to passing this genetic information along. All right, so in terms of what does this look like, this is a very oversimplified picture, but it's meant to help you understand what does chromosome look like. Okay, so a chromosome, and your book, I don't love this, your book calls this a chromosome. This is together, this is a chromosome, and each of these individual strands is really more known as chromatids. So two chromatids typically are going to make up a chromosome, which is going to be a pair of chromatids, but your book is kind of loose with the terminology. So the human body contains 23 pairs of chromatids, or 23 chromosomes, right? 46 chromatids. They're saying 46 chromosomes. It's really 46 chromatids that make up 23 chromosomes. Okay, a pair of chromatids make up a chromosome. And that's going to be the first question for your Google form is, what makes up a chromosome? And what makes up a chromosome is a pair of chromatids. Okay? Sorry, that was our new puppy sneezing. Okay, and so on each chromatid, on each pair of chromatid, or on each chromosome, you're going to have many, many genes being coded for. And like I said, this is just a very simplified diagram of, what is that, 7 different genes that it's coding for. But really, in reality, each cell is coding for 20 to 25,000 genes. And if you have 23 chromosomes or pairs of chromatids in each cell, that means that roughly 1,000 genes are on each chromosome. Roughly 1,000 genes are on each chromosome. All right, the genes, again, so for each chromatid that forms a chromosome, one from the mom, one from the dad, the genes are going to line up in the same order on each chromatid. And so what's going to depend on what is expressed is what we've been studying, which is, how is the trait expressed? Is it dominant recessive? Is it codominance? Is it incomplete dominance? And then what are the genes that you've inherited? Or what are the alleles that you've inherited? And how then does that, what kind of phenotype is shown then? Remember, phenotype is, what does this actually look like? All right, so the process that this happens is meiosis. And meiosis is a process that you're going to study more in depth next year when you guys all head off to biology. So we're just going to highlight a few things. One thing I want you to understand, and this is going to be the second question on your video check, is, what is the same between meiosis and mitosis? Well, the same between meiosis and mitosis is this replication that it talks about, which basically says when a cell is getting ready to divide, it's going to take all of the chromosomes that it has and it's going to replicate them. It's going to make another copy. And that happens in both mitosis and meiosis. Okay? Now, what is mitosis and meiosis? Mitosis is basically just cell division. It's the process that normal cells take to divide, in which one parent cell divides and ultimately forms 2 identical daughter cells. And those daughter cells are identical to each other, and they're also identical to the parent cell. So that's the third question for your Google form. Okay? In mitosis, when a parent cell divides, it creates 2 daughter cells. They are identical to each other, and they are identical to the parent cell. Meiosis is different in that the point of meiosis is to ultimately form 4 cells with half the DNA, with half the number of chromosomes. so that when they combine in sexual reproduction, you end up with the right number of chromosomes in the resulting organism. Okay, so in meiosis, they both are cell division. In mitosis, we're trying to end up with daughter cells that are identical, and our body uses mitosis to grow, to repair itself. Meiosis is a process also of cell division, but the point of meiosis is to end up with sex cells that have half of the DNA material needed for an organism. And so that's question number 4. The point of meiosis is to end up with cells, sex cells, that have half of the DNA needed to create an organism. All right, so how does this happen? So before meiosis, as well as at the beginning of before mitosis, we have this replication. You have the chromosomes copying themselves. So what would otherwise be just a cell with a blue and a red, so this cell is, let me see where I'm at time-wise. I want to make sure I don't run out of time. I'm at 11 minutes. I should be good. So this cell, which would normally have 2 chromosomes, it's a very simplistic organism, copies itself, so that now it has 4. It has 2 reds and 2 blues, where a traditional cell of that organism would just have 1 of each. And the first thing that's going to happen is those chromosomes, those pairs of chromosomes, those are called homologous chromosomes. Okay, another word this is our last question for the video check. This pair of chromosomes that are identical are called homologous chromosomes. And these homologous chromosomes line up, and these spindle fibers that appear on either end of the cell start to pull them apart. And ultimately, they're each pulled to one end, and a nucleus reforms around them, and they're good to go. They're viable cells. And now where meiosis takes another turn is with meiosis, that division happens a second time. Okay, so there's no replication, but within each of these new cells, we take each chromatid and pull it to opposite ends, just like this. And so ultimately you result in 4 sex cells, each with half of the genetic material, half the chromosomes needed for the organism. And that's true for egg, and that's true for sperm. They're both formed the same way. All right, last part. How does sexual and asexual reproduction compare? So, when an organism produces sexually, they're going to use the process of mitosis, like we said, for growth and repair of cells, body cells. And they're going to use meiosis for the point of making cells to reproduce. Organisms that reproduce asexually are able to reproduce offspring on their own. It's not a combination of 2 individuals. It's just them basically duplicating themselves. And so they are able to do that just with the process of mitosis. And your book goes through and talks about, the different benefits and drawbacks of asexual and sexual reproduction, which I'm highlighting down here. But we haven't talked a lot about asexual reproduction, but asexual reproduction happens in a number of ways. I highlight 2 ways that it can happen. So fission is one way, and that's going to happen with really simplistic, probably single cell organisms, and they're basically just going to divide in half. And so an individual organism that was 1 cell will divide in half, and now there's 2 of them. But they're exactly identical to each other, and they're identical to the initial original organism. Budding is another way that they can do that. This is an example of budding down here. So budding is basically like a small organism starts to grow off of the parent, and eventually it splits off and is its own individual. Now it still is going to be genetically identical to the parent. So it's kind of like, in a weird way, like if your arm was the beginning of another person, and eventually that your arm kind of split from your body, and a new person grew off that arm, and maybe you grew another arm then. So it's you take a portion of that original parent, and it starts to grow a new organism, and then that organism splits off eventually and becomes its own independent organism. Down here, oh, and I forgot to do this. I totally messed this up. In fact, I'll repost this picture. I started listing the advantages and disadvantages of sexual reproduction here before I realized it was actually the asexual column. And so I ended up having to put asexual over here. So I will repost this picture. I was going to put a black marker over these so you see. But you can read these as to what the advantages and disadvantages are. Basically, for sexual reproduction, the advantage is you're going